Over at DC Comics, the publisher just wrapped up a fantastic comic book event called Dark Crisis on Infinite Earths. This series really focused on fleshing out the new generation of heroes over in the DC universe. And today, we're going to go ahead and look at what the DC universe is looking like post-Dark Crisis. And DC is looking to explore that concept through their publishing initiative called Dawn of DC. Dawn of DC sees the publisher really kind of shake up and change up some of the creative teams and status quos of their biggest titles. My name is Arakko Braddock, and today let's go ahead and start Dawn of DC with Action Comics 1051. But before we dive deeper into the video, I want to encourage you to consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the like button on the video if you enjoy our content. Without further ado, I want to introduce Action Comics 1051 by reading off DC Comics' solicitation text for the issue. Action Comics 1051 begins a brand new format for DC's most action-packed title, offering not one, not two, but three epic adventures of Superman and the entire Super family. Following the bombshell events of Action Comics 1050, the world's relationship with Superman is forever changed. The upper limits of his supercharged powers have yet to be reached, and the House of L's transformation of Metropolis led by Steel has begun. But Lex Luthor has found the perfect instrument in which to undo everything Superman is working to achieve. Metallo, whose hatred of Superman is matched only for his hatred for Luthor himself. Then in Lois and Clark 2 Doom Rising, Dan Jurgens and Lee Weeks return to tell the tale of a young jonkent on the farm with his parents, learning about his abilities, coming of age, and battling the Doombreaker. And finally, Power Girl returns in part one of a three-part story spinning out of Lazarus Planet. This issue marks the first appearance of new characters, new costumes, and a new era of Action Comics. It all starts here. And now it's time to go ahead and introduce our creative team on Action Comics 1051. I'm going to be breaking this issue down story by story. So let's start with the first one. It's called Speeding Bullets, and this one is written by Phillip Kennedy Johnson, illustrated by Rafa Sandova, colored by Matt Herms, lettered by Dave Sharpe, and I want to go ahead and show off the gorgeous cover for the issue over from Dan Mora. Big thanks to Adventures in Poor Taste for posting these comic book previews so incredibly quickly. And I think you're really going to be able to tell right from the cover alone, with what's different in Action Comics post-Dark Crisis. Really, it appears to be kind of from this first story that writer Phillip Kennedy Johnson and artist Rafa Sandova seem to be kind of expanding their scope to more Superman characters in Action Comics. Like we're getting Connor over from kind of the Superman titles. We also have Supergirl, Natasha. We have Jonathan Kent, the new Superman, Kenan Kong, and of course Clark Kent, as well as two Philosian characters coming over from the pages of Warworld. So I'm really glad that even though this is kind of like a new era of Action Comics, that we still have some elements from that Warworld story that's going to make sure that this issue is a little bit more cohesive than it would have been otherwise. So I really enjoy kind of the issue at large due to the way that it feels so much different from what Phillip Kennedy Johnson was doing before over on the series. As the scope of Superman and Action Comics just feels bigger in this issue with all of the supporting characters joining the team. In most of these preview pages that we have, artist Rafa Sandova is really kind of, exploring some of the themes from Phillip Kennedy Johnson as he kind of types up, some caption boxes from the perspective of Lois Lane in the issue, which is a really kind of intriguing way to open up the issue at large. Phillip Kennedy Johnson does a great job kind of introducing readers to a more domestic setting with the Superman family. And at times, these sort of like domestic settings with characters sitting around playing video games can seem a little bit, stale. But thankfully, Johnson really kind of takes the time to flesh out this new status quo. So, despite the fact that we have so many kind of Superman characters together in a plainclothes setting, there's still so much fun to be had because this is the first time we've seen these characters together in this setting for a really long time. And also, kind of the combination of new and old Superman elements really make this issue stand out. One of the things I was a little bit concerned about with Action Comics was if Phillip Kennedy Johnson was going to be able to keep the focus on the character of Metallo, John Corbin, as he continues to do battle with not only Lex Luthor, but Superman and his entire family at large. Thankfully, that is not forgotten, and so many kind of story elements are explored a little bit deeper, and we start to get, a more direct clash between Metallo and the Superman family, which is really great to see in this series. I love how Phillip Kennedy Johnson has just taken his time ever so slowly building up to the big confrontation with these characters. And now it feels like it's time. And there's just so much context behind this upcoming battle to make it more interesting than it would have been otherwise. Elsewhere in the pages of the issue, I really enjoyed the artwork from Rafa Sandova. There are so many Superman characters in this issue. It must be hard getting them all right with kind of the same perspective in mind. One aspect of the issue from Rafa Sandova that I think came up a little short was the fact that I did have a hard time telling apart some of the characters in a plainclothes setting. It was particularly between Jonathan and Connor that I got a little bit mixed up on. And, I think the hairstyle of Lois also looks similar to some of the Philosian characters as well. So it's not something that's really going to detract from your overall enjoyment of the series, but it was noticeable in certain panels. Although Sandoval's kind of secondary actions for the characters and the way that he kind of depicts, any sort of figure on the comic book page is great. I think Rafa Sandoval is an artist that is so good at depicting motion on the page. Like, take a look at these speed lines in a kind of a scene that's really fleshing out the expansive speed of Superman. So in that respect, it almost feels like Johnson is writing directly to Rafa Sandoval's strengths in the issue. So while this is a really kind of big shift in tone from previous issues of Action Comics, the changes in this chapter feel like it's invigorated the book with so much energy. And I really hope that Johnson is able to stay on Action Comics in the long term and kind of tie everything together. One thing I was worried about with DC announcing so many stories in the pages of Action Comics was that Johnson wasn't going to get time to kind of flesh out what he had to write, during his Action Comics run. But thankfully, we have, pretty much a full Action Comics issue here in terms of page count. So there's no reason, there's essentially no reason to be worried about that at all, which is great to see over from DC, because I think a lot of comics readers are kind of coming to the conclusion that Johnson is doing something special in Action. So really enjoyed kind of that first story over from Johnson and Sandoval. And next up, I want to introduce the second story in the collection. This one is called Home Again. It's written by Dan Jurgens, illustrated by Lee Weeks, colored by Elizabeth Breitweiser, and lettered by Rob Leigh. So in terms of the Home Again story, I actually didn't read the solicit from DC before checking out the issue. So I was really shocked to see the return of Lois and Clark, the kind of miniseries that Dan Jurgens and Lee Weeks worked on previously. While I was never kind of the biggest fan of that series, I think this issue certainly has its moments, but it's kind of difficult to figure out why DC chose to include this story in the collection. Because if you look at this, it's kind of outside of DC's current continuity. And having something that looks back just a few years into the past and kind of shows how Jonathan Kent was just aged up very quickly, really started to kind of detract from my enjoyment of the issue. I just couldn't tell why this chapter was here or why this creative team felt the need to return to the Lois and Clark story. I wish this was a little bit more tied to Dawn of DC and, the creative team was kind of going in a different direction. The one thing about this story, aside from Leigh Weeks' art that really caught my eye, was the last page of the issue. I'm not quite sure where or what direction this is going in, but there was kind of a really intriguing character introduced on the final page, and I'm very interested to see kind of where this goes next with this specific character. And before we move on here, I do want to say that Leigh Weeks' art is just absolutely gorgeous. I love how Leigh Weeks kind of fleshes out the characters and makes sure that the tone for each kind of character looks so kind of correct and like ultra sleek and modern. I really enjoy looking at Weeks' art, and I really love kind of all of the lines that he uses to kind of enhance, the characters and, spaceships, the hair, whatever it be. I love Leigh Weeks' line that he uses. I think it looks just gorgeous. All right, and let's go ahead and take a look at our last story. This one is a really fun one as well. It's called Head Like a Hole. This one is written by Leah Williams, illustrated by Marguerite Sauvage, and lettered by Becca Carey. So this chapter of the series is a return to the Power Girl in Omen story over from that Lazarus Planet issue. I love this chapter. I think it's so cool. The idea of having, Power Girl becoming a little bit more like psychically aware and developing new powers from the Lazarus resin is so intriguing. And I really hope DC continues to kind of keep an eye on this and flesh it out even farther. I've said this in the past, but the artwork from Marguerite Sauvage is just so gorgeous. I love the way that Marguerite Sauvage, draws female characters on the comic book page. They just look so incredibly detailed. And I love kind of like the costume shakeups as well. There's just so much incredible content in this last story. Also, the inclusion of some of the Titans characters also helped this title feel essential to kind of like the overall Dawn of DC narrative, as kind of, Beast Boy, a member of the Titans, goes to Power Girl and Omen along with Nightwing to figure out how to get Beast Boy to change back into human form. And kind of watching them, go deep into Beast Boy's psyche and find kind of other strands of continuity in the DC universe is incredibly intriguing over on the page. So really enjoyed the writing from Leah Williams and the artwork from Marguerite Sauvage in this issue. And to be honest, aside from the main chapter, this Power Girl and Omen story is going to be, I think, one of the main reasons why I'll return to Action Comics month after month over in the DC universe. So those were my thoughts over on Action Comics 1051. I think this is a pretty solid issue of the series. I really love kind of the Phillip Kennedy Johnson and Rafa Sandova portion, really fleshing out what the post-Dark Crisis era of the Action Comics series is going to look like. And there was an intriguing kind of cliffhanger over in that Home Again story, which featured a return to the Lois and Clark miniseries. The final chapter really helped kind of flesh out this new status quo for Power Girl as well, which was really interesting to see over at DC Comics. But I want to know from you, did you like this issue as much as I did? What were your thoughts on DC really kind of bringing out the full Superman supporting cast and even introducing a couple new characters in this issue? Also, did you like some of those costume shakeups? I think they look gorgeous, but I'm curious to know your thoughts. Thank you guys so much for checking out the video, and we'll be back very soon for more excellent comic book content. We'll see you soon. Bye.